when the officers' club manager asked the woman in the plain uniform to serve drinks. He had no idea he was speaking to the incoming commanding officer of the base's most advanced destroyer squadron. By the time he realized his mistake, the entire naval base would be forced to confront an uncomfortable truth about respect, assumptions, and who gets to be invisible. Naval Station Norfolk, Virginia. Friday evening, 1830 hours. The officers' club was packed with Navy personnel attending a formal reception for the change of command ceremony scheduled for the following day. Hundreds of officers in their dress whites filled the elegant space, drinks in hand, engaged in the kind of professional networking that happened at these events. The club was one of the most prestigious venues on the base. High ceilings, polished wood floors, walls decorated with naval history, and portraits of distinguished officers who had served at Norfolk over the decades. Tonight's event was particularly significant. The Atlantic Fleet was transitioning leadership, and senior officers from across the Navy had traveled to Norfolk to attend. Through the main entrance, a woman entered quietly. She wore a standard Navy working uniform, the kind worn by thousands of sailors every day. Plain, pressed, functional. But notably, the uniform displayed no rank insignia on the shoulders, no warfare pins on the chest, no name tape. Just clean Navy fatigues that could belong to anyone, from a seaman recruit to a captain. She carried a small bag and looked around the crowded room with calm observation, assessing the space the way someone with tactical training automatically does when entering any environment. The club manager, a civilian named Richard Foster, who had run the officers' club for 15 years, noticed her immediately. He was stressed, understaffed, and dealing with an event that had 200 more attendees than originally planned. He saw a woman in a working uniform without rank, and his stressed brain made an instant assumption. "You," he called out, walking briskly toward her. "You're late. The serving staff was supposed to be here 30 minutes ago." The woman turned to face him, her expression neutral. "I think there's been a—" "No excuses," Foster interrupted, his tone sharp with frustration. "We have 200 officers waiting for drinks and appetizers. I need you on the floor now. Have you done club service before?" The woman paused, seeming to consider how to respond. "I have experience in service, yes." "Good. Come with me." Foster grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the kitchen before she could say anything else. Behind the kitchen door, he pointed to stacks of serving trays and a cart loaded with champagne glasses. "Start with champagne. Move through the room, offer drinks, keep the trays full. Clear empties when you see them. Basic hospitality. Can you handle that?" The woman looked at him for a long moment, then looked at the trays. "I can handle it." "Then get moving. We're already behind schedule." Foster rushed back out to deal with other crises, leaving the woman standing in the kitchen. She looked at the champagne trays, then at the busy room beyond the door. A slight smile crossed her face, gone almost immediately. She picked up a tray, balanced it professionally, and pushed through the kitchen door into the crowded officers' club. As she moved through the room offering champagne, several officers took glasses without really looking at her. She was service staff, essentially invisible to people focused on their conversations and networking. A group of lieutenant commanders stood near the bar, discussing the upcoming change of command ceremony. One of them, a man named Stevens, noticed her approaching with the tray. Finally, some service. "I've been waiting 20 minutes for a drink." He took a glass without making eye contact with her. His companion, a lieutenant commander named Walsh, took a glass and looked at her briefly. "You're new here, aren't you? Haven't seen you working the club before." The woman smiled slightly. "First time serving in this particular venue? Yes." "Well, you picked a busy night. Keep the champagne coming." She moved on through the crowd, offering drinks, clearing empty glasses, playing the role of service staff with surprising professionalism. Near the windows, a captain was holding court with several junior officers, telling a story about a deployment to the Mediterranean. The woman approached with her tray. The captain took a glass mid-sentence without even glancing at her. "As I was saying, the key to successful navigation in congested waters is maintaining situational awareness at all times. You can't assume." He continued his story while the woman moved away, a slight ironic expression crossing her face at his words about assumptions. For 30 minutes, she circulated through the room, serving drinks, clearing glasses, being systematically invisible to the officers who took champagne from her tray without seeing her as anything more than staff. A few officers said thank you. Most didn't acknowledge her at all. Foster appeared periodically to check on her progress, nodding with approval. "You're doing better than the regular staff. Keep it up." Then something changed. The main door to the officers' club burst open, and a Navy captain strode in, his face flushed, his expression showing urgency bordering on panic. He was Captain James Rodriguez, the current commanding officer of the base. He should have been mingling with the senior officers, playing host, ensuring the event ran smoothly. Instead, he was scanning the room with desperate intensity, looking for someone. His eyes swept across the crowd, passed over the woman with the serving tray, then snapped back to her. His face went from flushed to pale in an instant. He crossed the room at something close to a run, weaving through groups of officers, his focus locked on the woman serving champagne. Officers turned to watch, confused by their base commander's behavior. Rodriguez reached her just as she was offering drinks to a group of ensigns who were trying to look professional and experienced, despite being clearly nervous at this high-level event. Rodriguez stopped directly in front of her, breathing hard. The room was beginning to notice. Conversations were trailing off. People were turning to see what was happening. Rodriguez came to attention, rendered a crisp salute, and spoke in a voice loud enough to carry across the now quieting room. "Commander Chen!" The woman holding the serving tray returned his salute calmly, balancing the tray in one hand while doing so. The room went completely silent. Rodriguez's voice was strained, almost cracking. "Commander Sarah Chen, why in God's name are you serving drinks at the officers' club?" The woman, Commander Chen, looked at him with the same neutral expression she'd maintained all evening. "I was asked to help with the event, Captain. I'm simply following instructions." Rodriguez looked like he might have a stroke. "Following instructions? Ma'am, you're supposed to be... We were expecting you. Your flight was delayed and we thought..." He stopped, processing what must have happened. He turned slowly to look at the crowd of officers who were now staring in shocked silence. Then he turned back to Commander Chen. "Ma'am, did someone ask you to serve drinks?" "The club manager did," Chen said calmly. "He seemed to need assistance, so I provided it." Foster, who had been standing near the bar, felt his stomach drop. The color drained from his face as he realized what he had done. Commander Chen set the serving tray down on a nearby table with careful precision. The room remained absolutely silent. 200 naval officers watching a scene unfold that they didn't fully understand but recognized as significant. Rodriguez looked around the room, his expression showing anger, embarrassment, and something like despair. He turned back to Commander Chen. "Ma'am, on behalf of this entire base, I apologize. This is unacceptable." Chen held up her hand. "Captain Rodriguez, we'll discuss this tomorrow at the change of command ceremony. For now, I'd like to finish what I started." She picked up the serving tray again. Rodriguez looked confused. "Ma'am, you don't need to." "I'm aware of what I need to do, Captain. Right now I'm observing. Continue with your event." She turned and walked back toward the kitchen, leaving Rodriguez standing in the middle of the silent room. Foster, the club manager, stood frozen near the bar, his career flashing before his eyes. The ensigns who had taken champagne from her moments before looked at each other in horror. Lieutenant Commander Stevens, who had complained about waiting 20 minutes for a drink, felt physically ill. Captain Walsh, who had commented that she was new to the club, wanted to disappear. And throughout the room, dozens of officers were beginning to realize that they had walked past, ignored, or taken drinks from someone who was about to become one of the most senior officers on the base. Commander Sarah Chen, Commanding Officer Designate of Destroyer Squadron 15, graduate of the Naval Academy, 15 years of distinguished service, multiple combat deployments, Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with Valor, recipient of the Surface Warfare Officer of the Year Award. And for the past 30 minutes, she had been serving champagne to junior officers who hadn't bothered to look at her closely enough to realize who she was. Captain Rodriguez stood in the center of the room, his mind racing through the implications. The woman who would take command of an entire destroyer squadron tomorrow had just spent 30 minutes being invisible to the officers who would be working under her command authority. And she had done it calmly, professionally, without complaint or correction. Rodriguez realized with sinking certainty that this wasn't an accident. Commander Chen had allowed this to happen, had perhaps even orchestrated it. She had wanted to see how the base treated someone without obvious rank insignia. She had wanted to observe behavior when people didn't know they were being observed by senior leadership. And what she had observed was an entire officers' club full of people who made assumptions based on appearance, who treated service staff as invisible, who took without acknowledging, who didn't bother to verify before judging. Rodriguez turned to address the silent room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying authority despite the situation. "I need to inform you that the woman who has been serving drinks for the past 30 minutes is Commander Sarah Chen. She will take command of Destroyer Squadron 15 at tomorrow's ceremony." The silence somehow deepened. Commander Chen is one of the most decorated surface warfare officers in the Atlantic Fleet. She has commanded at sea in combat operations. She has been selected for early promotion to captain. She is being groomed for flag rank. He paused. "And we just treated her like waitstaff because she arrived in a working uniform without rank insignia visible." Foster, the club manager, finally found his voice. "Sir, I didn't know. She didn't say who." "That's exactly the point." Rodriguez cut him off. "She didn't have to identify herself. You should have verified before making assumptions." He looked around the room at all the officers. All of us should have. In the kitchen, Commander Chen set down her serving tray and removed the apron Foster had given her. She pulled out her phone and sent a single text message to her executive officer, who was waiting at the BOQ. "Inspection complete. Results as expected. See you at the ceremony tomorrow. 0900 sharp." She put her phone away, picked up her bag, and walked calmly out the back entrance of the officers' club. Behind her, 200 naval officers were beginning to understand that they had just failed a test they didn't know they were taking, and the woman who would command them was already planning how to address what she had observed. Tomorrow's change of command ceremony was going to be very different from what anyone expected. Captain Rodriguez stood in the silent officers' club, watching Commander Chen's back as she walked calmly out the rear entrance. The weight of what had just happened settled over the room like a heavy fog. Foster, the club manager, broke the silence with a voice that shook. "Sir, I need to apologize. I thought she was part of the serving staff. She was wearing a working uniform with no rank visible. I just assumed. You assumed, Rodriguez repeated, his voice cold. You saw someone in uniform and made a judgment without verification. And then you ordered a commander to serve drinks. Foster looked like he might collapse. Rodriguez turned to address the entire room. Everyone, listen carefully. What happened here tonight is going to be addressed. But right now, I need every officer who interacted with Commander Chen to write down exactly what happened. What you said, what you did, how you treated her. Reports due to my office by 0800 tomorrow. A lieutenant commander near the bar raised his hand hesitantly. Sir, what exactly is going to happen? Rodriguez looked at him. That's up to Commander Chen. She's taking command tomorrow, and based on what just occurred, I suspect she's going to have some very specific things to say about the culture on this base. He checked his watch. This reception is over. Everyone dismissed. Go back to your quarters and think very carefully about what you witnessed tonight. The room began to empty, officers filing out in subdued silence, a stark contrast to the networking chatter that had filled the space 30 minutes earlier. After they left, Rodriguez sat down heavily in a chair. Pulling out his phone, he called the one person who might have insight into what Commander Chen was thinking. The call was answered on the second ring. Captain Martinez, Rodriguez said. It's Jim Rodriguez at Norfolk. We have a situation. Captain Elena Martinez was Commander Chen's outgoing predecessor, currently transitioning out of command before her own promotion and reassignment. What kind of situation? Martinez asked. Your relief just spent 30 minutes serving champagne at the officers' club because our club manager thought she was waitstaff. There was a long pause. Then Martinez laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but genuine, sustained laughter. Rodriguez frowned. Elena, this isn't funny. This is a catastrophic failure of protocol and respect. I'm probably going to have to fire my club manager, and God knows how many officers are going to face disciplinary action. Martinez's laughter subsided. Jim, you don't understand. This wasn't an accident. Sarah Chen doesn't do accidents. What do you mean? I mean, she planned this. She told me 3 weeks ago that she wanted to observe Norfolk before taking command. She wanted to see how the base actually operates when senior leadership isn't obviously present. Rodriguez processed this information. She intentionally allowed herself to be mistaken for service staff? More than allowed. She probably encouraged it. Sarah is brilliant at reading organizational culture. She can spot dysfunction in minutes just by watching how people interact when they think nobody important is watching. Martinez paused. Let me guess. She arrived in a working uniform with no rank insignia, got mistaken for enlisted or staff, and then observed how everyone treated her? Exactly that. That's pure Sarah Chen. She's done variations of this at every command. Once she posed as a new ensign and spent a week observing before revealing who she was. Another time she joined a working party and evaluated leadership by watching how the chief ran operations. Rodriguez rubbed his temples. So this was a test. Everything Sarah does is a test. The question is whether your base passed or failed. Based on what I observed, we failed spectacularly. Martinez's tone became more serious. Then, tomorrow's change of command ceremony is going to be very educational. Sarah doesn't waste teaching opportunities. She'll use what happened tonight to make a point about the culture she expects. Do you have any advice? Yes. Don't try to apologize or make excuses. Don't punish people before she addresses it. And most importantly, listen to what she says tomorrow. She's about to teach your entire base a lesson about assumptions, respect, and what real leadership looks like. After ending the call, Rodriguez sat alone in the empty officers' club, thinking about Commander Sarah Chen. He pulled up her service record on his phone, reading through details he had reviewed before, but now saw in a different light. Sarah Chen, age 37, Naval Academy class of 2010, graduated third in her class. Surface warfare officer qualification earned in record time. Multiple combat deployments as a junior officer aboard destroyers and cruisers in the Persian Gulf and Mediterranean. Her first command had been USS Winston, a destroyer, which she took at age 32, younger than almost anyone in modern Navy history. During her command tour, Winston had received the Battle Efficiency Award, the top recognition for combat readiness. She had earned a Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with Valor for her actions during a counter-piracy operation off Somalia, where she personally led a boarding team that rescued hostages from a hijacked merchant vessel. Her reputation in the surface warfare community was legendary. Officers who served under her spoke of her with a mixture of awe and fear. She demanded perfection, but developed her people intensely. She was known for seeing through any bullshit, for testing officers constantly, and for caring more about actual capability than appearance or protocol. She was also known for something else, a teaching style that involved putting people in uncomfortable situations to expose their assumptions and biases. Rodriguez now understood. Tonight wasn't a mistake or a failure of protocol. It was Commander Chen's opening move. She had assessed the base in 30 minutes of serving champagne, learning more about the culture than months of official reports could have revealed. The next morning, Rodriguez arrived at his office at 600 to find a message waiting from Commander Chen. Captain Rodriguez, please do not take any disciplinary action against the club manager or any officers regarding last night's incident until after this morning's ceremony. I'll be addressing the situation then. Respectfully, Commander S. Chen. At 8:30, officers began gathering for the change of command ceremony. The event was held on the pier next to USS Halsey, the flagship of Destroyer Squadron 15 that Commander Chen would now command. Hundreds of personnel assembled. Sailors in dress whites, officers in their service dress blues, distinguished guests, including a Rear Admiral from Fleet Forces Command. At 8:55, Commander Chen arrived. This time, she wore her service dress blues with all rank insignia and warfare devices properly displayed. The gold oak leaves of a commander, the surface warfare officer pin, ribbons representing 15 years of distinguished service. She looked like what she was, a highly accomplished naval officer about to take command of a destroyer squadron. The ceremony began with traditional protocol, the national anthem, opening remarks from Captain Rodriguez, speech from the outgoing commander, Captain Martinez, who spoke about the squadron's accomplishments and introduced her relief. Then it was Commander Chen's turn to speak. She walked to the podium with calm confidence and looked at the assembled crowd. Good morning. I'm Commander Sarah Chen, and as of 1000 hours today, I will have the honor of commanding Destroyer Squadron 15. Her voice carried clearly across the pier. Before I speak about my vision for this squadron, I want to address something that happened last night at the Officers' Club. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Word had spread about the incident. Last night, I arrived at Norfolk after a delayed flight. I was wearing a working uniform with no visible rank insignia. I entered the Officers' Club where a reception was being held. She paused. The club manager, seeing a woman in a plain uniform, assumed I was part of the serving staff. He instructed me to serve drinks. I complied. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. For 30 minutes, I served champagne to approximately 50 officers. I cleared glasses. I moved through the room offering drinks. And during that time, I made several observations. She pulled out a small notebook. First observation: of the 50 officers I directly served, fewer than 10 made eye contact with me. Fewer than 5 said thank you. The majority treated me as invisible. The crowd was silent now. Second observation: multiple officers made comments about me within my hearing, about my appearance, about being new, about being late. Not one of them thought to verify who I was before making assumptions. She turned a page. Third observation: when the base commander recognized me and called me by rank, the entire room was shocked. not because I had done anything wrong, but because no one had bothered to look at me carefully enough to realize I might be someone other than who they assumed. Rodriguez, standing to the side, felt the weight of her words. Now, some of you might think I'm angry about what happened, that I'm going to use this incident to punish people or make an example of someone. She closed the notebook. You would be wrong. I'm not angry. I'm grateful. Because in 30 minutes, serving champagne, I learned more about the culture of this base than months of official reports could have told me. She looked directly at the assembled officers. I learned that we have a problem with assumptions. We see people and immediately categorize them based on superficial factors. Gender, apparent rank, role, appearance, and once we've categorized someone, we stop seeing them as individuals worthy of respect and attention. A lieutenant commander in the front row looked down at his shoes. This isn't just about me. This is about how we treat every person on this base. The junior enlisted sailors, the civilian contractors, the support staff. Anyone who doesn't obviously signal importance through rank or position. She stepped away from the podium, speaking without notes now. In the Navy, we talk about respect for every person, regardless of rank. We say that every sailor matters, every role is important, every contribution counts. But do we actually believe that? Do we act like it? The question hung in the air. Last night suggested that we don't, at least not consistently. We respect people who we think are important. We respect obvious rank. We respect people who look like us or act like us or fit our mental model of what a naval officer should be. She walked along the front of the assembled crowd. But the moment someone doesn't fit that model, we become blind. We make assumptions. We stop seeing them as fully human and start seeing them as functions, as roles to be performed rather than people to be respected. She stopped and turned back to face them. I'm going to tell you a story. When I was an ensign, fresh out of the academy, I reported to my first ship. I was young, female, and didn't look like the typical surface warfare officer. My first day aboard, a chief petty officer saw me in passageway and told me to go clean the wardroom. Scattered nervous laughter from the crowd. I complied. I cleaned that wardroom for an hour. And while I was cleaning, I listened to officers talking about the new ensign who was supposed to report that day. They speculated about whether she would be able to handle the job, whether she was qualified, whether she'd been given the assignment because of diversity requirements. The laughter stopped. When I finished cleaning, I reported to the executive officer as ordered. He was shocked to discover that the new ensign he'd been waiting for had spent the past hour scrubbing toilets because someone made an assumption. She smiled slightly. That XO was furious. He wanted to discipline the chief. But I asked him not to, because that chief taught me the most important lesson of my career. She looked around at the crowd. He taught me that assumptions are tactical vulnerabilities. That if I allowed people to underestimate me based on appearance, I gained an advantage. That looking underestimated is one of the most powerful tools a leader can have. She returned to the podium. So I learned to use it. Throughout my career, I've used people's assumptions against them. Not maliciously, but strategically. To observe, to assess, to understand who sees clearly and who operates on bias. Rodriguez was beginning to understand the full picture now. Last night was the latest example. I allowed the club manager to assume I was staff. I allowed officers to serve me drinks without really seeing me. And in doing so, I learned exactly which officers are paying attention and which are operating on autopilot. She pulled out another notebook, a different one. This morning, I received 47 reports from officers who interacted with me last night. 47 officers who honestly documented how they treated someone they thought was staff, how they spoke, what they said, whether they showed basic courtesy and respect. She held up the notebook. These reports tell me more about your character than any official evaluation could, because they show me how you behave, when you think there's no consequence, when you think no one important is watching. The crowd was absolutely silent. Some of you failed this test badly. You were dismissive, discourteous, or outright rude. You treated someone you perceived as subordinate with contempt or indifference. She set the notebook down. But many of you passed. Many of you said thank you, made eye contact, treated me with basic human respect even though you thought I was just serving drinks. Those actions matter. They reveal character. She straightened. As I take command today, I want to make something absolutely clear. This squadron will operate on a foundation of universal respect. Every person, regardless of rank, role, or appearance, will be treated with dignity and courtesy. Not because it's required by regulation, though it is, but because it's the right way to treat fellow human beings. She looked at each section of the assembled crowd. If you can't do that, if you need someone to wear stars or oak leaves before you'll show them basic respect, then you don't belong in my squadron. I will move you out. Not as punishment, but because you lack the fundamental character required for the culture I'm building. Captain Martinez, standing to the side, smiled with approval. From this moment forward, Chen continued, we're going to operate differently. When you see someone on this base, don't assume you know who they are or what they do. Look, ask, verify. Treat every person as potentially the most important person you'll meet that day. She paused for effect. Because you never know. That sailor in working uniform might be an expert in a system you don't understand. That contractor might have critical knowledge you need. That person you're about to dismiss might be your new commanding officer. Scattered, nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. The club manager, Foster, stood in the back of the crowd, still uncertain about his future. Chen looked directly at him. Mr. Foster, please step forward. Foster walked through the crowd, his face pale, expecting to be publicly fired. He stopped in front of Commander Chen and stood at attention. Mr. Foster, Chen said, you made an assumption last night. You saw someone in a working uniform and assumed they were part of your serving staff. That assumption led you to give orders to a commander. Can you tell me why you made that assumption? Foster's voice shook. Ma'am, you were in a working uniform with no rank visible. We were understaffed. I was stressed. I made a snap judgment without verifying. It was unprofessional and wrong. I take full responsibility. Chen nodded. You're right. It was wrong. But I'm not going to fire you. Foster's eyes widened with surprise. I'm going to do something else. For the next 90 days, you're going to undergo training. Training on how to verify before assuming. Training on professional interaction with military personnel. Training on treating every person with respect, regardless of how they appear. She looked at the crowd. Mr. Foster isn't being punished. He's being developed. Because the goal isn't to destroy people who make mistakes. The goal is to help them become better. That applies to everyone in this squadron. She turned back to Foster. Do you accept this training requirement? Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Thank you, ma'am. Dismissed. Foster returned to his place in the crowd, relief evident on his face. Chen addressed the assembly one final time. Today, I take command of Destroyer Squadron 15 with pride and humility. This squadron has an outstanding reputation, but we're going to become even better. Not just in tactical capability, though that matters, but in how we treat each other, how we see each other, how we respect each other. She stood tall. The most effective fighting forces in history have been built on mutual respect and trust, on seeing every member as essential, on refusing to allow bias and assumption to blind us to capability and character. She saluted the assembled crowd. That's the squadron we're going to build together. Starting today, are you ready? A roar of "Yes, ma'am" came from hundreds of voices. Then let's get to work. The ceremony concluded with the traditional reading of orders, the shifting of the squadron flag, and Commander Chen officially assuming command. As the crowd dispersed, several officers approached Chen to speak with her directly. Lieutenant Commander Stevens, who had complained about waiting 20 minutes for a drink, was first. "Ma'am, I need to apologize for my behavior last night. I was discourteous and dismissive. I failed the test badly." Chen looked at him. "Did you submit an honest report this morning?" "Yes, ma'am. I documented everything, including my attitude." "Then you didn't fail completely. You failed the initial test, but passed the honesty test. That's something to build on." Stevens nodded, grateful for the perspective. One by one, officers who had interacted with Chen the night before approached to speak with her. Some apologizing, some thanking her for the lesson, all of them changed by the experience. Captain Rodriguez watched from a distance as his incoming squadron commander handled each interaction with patience and wisdom. Captain Martinez joined him. "She's something special, isn't she?" Martinez said. Rodriguez nodded. "I've never seen anyone turn a potentially career-ending incident into a teaching moment like that. She could have destroyed Foster, could have disciplined dozens of officers. Instead, she used it to reset the entire culture. That's why she's being groomed for flag rank," Martinez said. "Sarah Chen doesn't just command units, she transforms them. Give her 6 months and this will be the best squadron in the fleet." "What makes you so sure?" "Because I've seen her do it before. She has a gift for identifying cultural problems and fixing them at the root level. Not through punishment or fear, but through teaching and development." Rodriguez watched Chen talking with another group of officers, her demeanor patient and engaged. "I just hope the rest of the base learns the lesson as quickly as her squadron will." "They will," Martinez said confidently, "because what happened last night is already spreading through the entire base. By tomorrow, every sailor in Norfolk will know the story of the commander who served champagne. And they'll all understand the lesson." Rodriguez smiled. "Never assume you know who someone is based on appearance." "Exactly. And treat every person with respect, because you never know who you're really talking to." As the ceremony area cleared, Commander Sarah Chen stood on the pier next to USS Halsey, looking at the ship that would serve as her flagship. She had taken command, had established the culture she expected, had turned a moment of disrespect into a foundation for transformation. Now the real work began, building a squadron that didn't just talk about respect and character, but actually lived it every day. A squadron where assumptions were questioned, where everyone was seen, and where capability mattered more than appearance. It was going to be a challenge. But Commander Chen had never backed down from a challenge in her life. And she wasn't about to start now. 3 months after the change of command ceremony, Destroyer Squadron 15 was operating differently than any other unit at Naval Station Norfolk. The transformation wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was subtle, systematic, and deeply embedded in how people interacted every day. Commander Chen stood in the Squadron Operations Center, reviewing readiness reports from her 4 destroyers: USS Halsey, USS Porter, USS James E. Williams, and USS Roosevelt. 1,200 sailors across 4 ships, all now operating under her command philosophy. Her executive officer, Commander Michael Torres, approached with a tablet. "Ma'am, the weekly culture assessment is complete. Would you like to review it?" Chen had implemented something unprecedented in the Navy. Every week, a random sample of sailors from each ship, regardless of rank, filled out anonymous surveys about how they were being treated, whether they felt respected, and whether they observed bias or assumption-based behavior. The data was compiled and analyzed, not to punish anyone, but to identify systemic issues before they became problems. "What are we seeing?" Chen asked. Torres pulled up the charts. Respect scores are up 18% since you took command. Sailors report feeling more valued and heard. Incidents of discourteous behavior have dropped by 40%, and retention intentions are the highest in the Atlantic Fleet. What about problem areas? we're still seeing some issues with how junior officers interact with senior enlisted. Some ensigns are struggling to respect chiefs who have more experience. It's an ego thing, not malicious. But it's there. Chen made a note. Schedule a junior officer development session for next week. I'll lead it personally. Topic: why a 22-year-old college graduate should listen to a 40-year-old chief with 20 years of experience. Torres smiled. They're going to love that. They need to learn it. That assumption that a commission makes you automatically superior to enlisted personnel is exactly the kind of bias we're eliminating. As they reviewed more data, a young sailor entered the operations center hesitantly. She was a seaman, probably 19 or 20 years old, wearing working uniform and looking nervous about entering a space typically occupied by senior officers. Torres noticed her, and his instinct was to tell her to come back later. But he checked himself, remembering Commander Chen's teachings. "Can we help you, Seaman?" Chen glanced at the name tape. "Seaman Rodriguez," she finished. "What do you need?" "Ma'am, I was told to deliver this message directly to you. It's marked urgent from Fleet Forces Command." Rodriguez approached and handed Chen an envelope, her hands shaking slightly. Chen took it and looked at the young sailor. "First time delivering a message to a commander?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm kind of terrified." Chen smiled. "Don't be. I started where you are." Seaman, nervous about everything, convinced every senior officer was going to yell at me for existing. Rodriguez relaxed slightly. "How long have you been in the Navy, Seaman Rodriguez?" 4 months, ma'am. I just finished A school." "What's your rate?" "Operations specialist, ma'am." Chen's face showed interest. "That's excellent. We need good OSs. How are you finding the squadron so far?" Rodriguez hesitated. "Ma'am, can I be honest?" "Always. It's really different here. My classmates who went to other squadrons say their commanders never talk to junior enlisted. They say officers treat them like they're invisible unless something goes wrong. And here? Here you're in the operations center talking to me like I'm a person. That's different, ma'am." Chen looked at Torres, then back at Rodriguez. "Seaman, do you remember the story about me serving drinks at the officers' club?" Rodriguez's eyes widened. "Yes, ma'am. Everyone knows that story. They teach it in indoctrination now." "What lesson did you take from that story?" Rodriguez thought carefully. "That we shouldn't judge people by how they look or what uniform they're wearing. That respect should be universal." "Exactly right. And that applies to you as much as anyone. You're an operations specialist with fresh training and new perspectives. Your insights might be exactly what I need to hear. Never assume your rank makes your observations less valuable." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." Dismissed. "And Rodriguez?" "Yes, ma'am. Next time you need to deliver something to me, you can be less terrified. I don't bite." Rodriguez smiled and left the operations center with considerably more confidence than she'd entered. After she left, Torres spoke. "You do that with everyone. Every junior sailor who comes through here, you take time to actually see them and talk to them. Do you know how much that matters?" "I know exactly how much it matters. Because when I was a seaman, a commander took 5 minutes to talk to me like I was a person. It changed everything about how I viewed leadership and my place in the Navy." Torres made a note on his tablet. "Speaking of leadership development, we have the situation with Lieutenant Pak." "Ah, yes. The lieutenant who told a chief to clean the berthing area because he didn't like how it looked." "Exactly. The chief submitted a report. Says Lieutenant Pak has a pattern of treating senior enlisted as subordinates rather than technical experts." Chen's expression became more serious. "Get Lieutenant Pak in here. Now." 20 minutes later, Lieutenant Jason Pak stood at attention in Commander Chen's office. He was a recent Naval Academy graduate, 6 months out of commissioning, assigned to USS Porter as a junior division officer. Chen sat behind her desk, reviewing his service record on her computer. Lieutenant Pak, she said without looking up. 3.9 GPA from the academy. High marks in leadership courses, excellent physical fitness scores. On paper, you're exactly what the Navy wants in a junior officer. She looked up at him. So why am I getting reports that you're treating my chiefs like they're enlisted personnel who exist to follow your orders without question? Pak's face showed confusion. Ma'am, they are enlisted personnel. I'm an officer. That's the chain of command. Chen stood and walked around her desk. Let me tell you about Chief Ramirez, the man you ordered to clean berthing because you didn't like the arrangement of bunks. Ma'am, I was exercising command authority. Chief Ramirez has been in the Navy for 19 years, Chen interrupted. He served on 7 ships. He's done 4 combat deployments. He's an expert in damage control, having saved his ship during a fire that killed 3 sailors. He was awarded a Navy and Marine Corps medal for risking his life to rescue shipmates from a flooding compartment. She looked directly at Pak. You are 6 months out of college. You have 0 deployments, 0 combat experience, 0 technical expertise beyond basic officer training. And you thought it was appropriate to order him to rearrange bunks because you didn't like how they looked? Pak was beginning to understand he had made a serious error. Ma'am, I didn't know his background. You didn't ask. That's the problem. You saw enlisted rank and assumed you knew better. You didn't consider that he might have legitimate reasons for the berthing arrangement based on 19 years of experience. Chen walked to her window overlooking the pier. Let me tell you what's going to happen, Lieutenant. For the next 2 weeks, you're going to shadow Chief Ramirez. You're going to learn everything he knows about damage control, ship operations, and leadership. You're going to take orders from him and see what it's like to have someone with less experience and knowledge telling you how to do your job. Pak looked uncomfortable, but nodded. Yes, ma'am. And Lieutenant? If I hear one more report of you treating senior enlisted with anything less than the respect they've earned through years of service, I will remove you from this squadron. Not because I'm mean, but because you'll have demonstrated that you lack the fundamental character required to lead sailors. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am, I understand. And ma'am? I'm sorry, I was wrong. The fact that you can admit that tells me there's hope for you. Don't waste this opportunity. I won't, ma'am. After Pak left, Torres entered the office. That's the 4th junior officer we've had to recalibrate since you took command. Which means we have a systemic problem, not just individual problems. The Academy and OCS are producing officers who think their commission makes them automatically superior to enlisted personnel. Torres nodded. What's the fix? We're going to implement mandatory mentorship. Every junior officer gets paired with a senior enlisted mentor. They'll spend a minimum of 4 hours per week learning from that mentor. Learning what experience actually means. Learning why respect goes both ways in the chain of command. Chen pulled up a calendar on her computer. And I'm going to start quarterly forums where junior enlisted can ask me anything. No officers present except me. Complete anonymity. I want to hear directly from our newest sailors what they're experiencing. Torres typed notes. The chiefs are going to love that. They've been asking for something like this. The chiefs understand what I'm trying to do because they've seen toxic cultures before. They know that respect from the top down creates better units. Over the next 3 months, the cultural transformation in Destroyer Squadron 15 became even more pronounced. Lieutenant Pak completed his 2 weeks with Chief Ramirez and emerged a changed officer. He wrote a formal apology to the chief and requested to extend his mentorship for an additional month. By the end, Pak was one of the squadron's most vocal advocates for respecting enlisted expertise. The junior officer mentorship program became so successful that other squadrons began asking for details on how to implement it. Commander Chen's quarterly forums with junior enlisted sailors revealed issues that never would have appeared in formal reporting channels. Small problems about equipment, training gaps, and interpersonal dynamics that Chen could address before they became major issues. 6 months after taking command, Chen received a visit from Rear Admiral Patricia Stone, the officer responsible for surface force readiness in the Atlantic Fleet. They met in Chen's office aboard USS Halsey. "Commander Chen," Admiral Stone said, settling into a chair, "I'm here because your squadron is creating problems for me." Chen raised an eyebrow. "Problems, ma'am?" Stone smiled. "You're making every other squadron commander look bad. Your readiness scores are the highest in the fleet. Your retention rates are unprecedented. Your sailors score top marks on every evaluation. And most frustratingly, you're doing it with a command philosophy that completely defies conventional wisdom." Chen waited, unsure where this was going. "I've reviewed your methods," Stone continued. "The culture surveys, the mentorship programs, the respect-based leadership, the willingness to be vulnerable and admit mistakes. 20 years ago, this approach would have gotten you relieved of command for being too soft. And now, ma'am? Now I'm here to tell you that the Chief of Naval Operations wants you to develop a training program based on your methods. We're going to pilot it with 3 other squadrons and see if we can replicate your results." Chen was surprised. "Ma'am, I'm not sure my approach is something that can be packaged into a training program. It's more about fundamental attitude and character than specific techniques. I know. That's what makes it challenging. But we have to try. The Navy is losing too many talented people because of toxic leadership and culture. What you've built here proves there's a better way." Stone pulled out a folder. "You're being nominated for early promotion to captain. The board meets in 3 months, and you're a lock for selection. After that, you'll be given command of a larger unit, possibly a carrier battle group staff position." Chen absorbed this information. "What about the squadron? Your XO is ready. Commander Torres will fleet up to command when you leave. He's learned from you and will maintain the culture you've built." After Stone left, Chen stood at her window, looking at the 4 destroyers of her squadron. 6 months ago, she had arrived at this base and deliberately allowed herself to be mistaken for service staff. She had served champagne to officers who didn't see her. She had observed a culture of casual disrespect and assumption-based judgment. Now, that culture was transformed. Not completely, not perfectly, but fundamentally changed in ways that mattered. Sailors felt valued. Officers treated enlisted personnel with respect. People questioned their assumptions. Everyone worked to see each other as complete humans rather than just functions or ranks. It was the kind of change that couldn't be measured easily, but made all the difference in how people experienced their service. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Commander Chen, I'm the club manager who asked you to serve drinks 6 months ago. I completed your training program and wanted to thank you for not destroying my career. I've learned more in the past 6 months than in 15 years of doing this job. Respectfully, Richard Foster." Chen smiled and typed a response. "Mr. Foster, glad to hear it. The goal was never to punish you, just to help you grow. Keep up the good work. Fair winds. Commander Chen." She put her phone away and looked at her calendar. Tomorrow she had a meeting with new arrivals to the squadron. Junior sailors fresh out of training, nervous about their first real assignments. She would tell them the story of serving champagne at the officers' club. Would explain the lessons about assumptions and respect. Would help them understand that, in this squadron, every person mattered regardless of rank or role. It was the same message she delivered constantly, in different ways, to different audiences. But it never got old. Because the lesson was fundamental to everything she believed about leadership and service. That respect should be universal. That assumptions were dangerous. That seeing people clearly, without bias or preconception, was the foundation of effective leadership. She had learned those lessons the hard way during her own career. Through being underestimated, dismissed, and having to prove herself over and over. Now she was teaching those lessons to a new generation. And slowly, one squadron at a time, the Navy was learning that there was a better way to lead. A way that valued every person. A way that questioned assumptions. a way that built culture on respect rather than rank. It was harder than traditional command. Required more patience, more vulnerability, more willingness to engage with people at every level. But the results spoke for themselves. The best squadron in the fleet, the highest retention rates, the most satisfied sailors, and all of it built on a foundation established one night at an officers' club, when a commander served champagne and learned exactly what needed to change. 18 months after the officers' club incident, Captain Sarah Chen, recently promoted ahead of her peers, stood in the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island. She had been asked to deliver a lecture to senior officers attending the College of Naval Command and Staff. The auditorium held 200 commanders and captains, all of them experienced officers selected for advanced professional education before assuming major commands. Chen walked to the podium wearing her service dress blues, now with the 4 stripes of a captain and a chest full of ribbons representing nearly 2 decades of distinguished service. Good afternoon. I'm Captain Sarah Chen, and I'm here to talk about something that makes a lot of senior officers uncomfortable. Organizational culture, unconscious bias, and why the best leaders are often invisible. She clicked to her first slide, which showed a photograph of the Norfolk Officers Club. 18 months ago, I walked into this club wearing a working uniform with no visible rank insignia. Within 5 minutes, I was serving champagne to junior officers who had no idea who I was. For the next 30 minutes, I observed exactly how people behave when they think nobody important is watching. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Most of them had heard the story, but hearing it directly from Chen was different. Some of you are thinking this was a mean trick, that I entrapped people unfairly, that I should have identified myself immediately. She paused. You would be wrong. What I did was create a natural experiment in organizational culture. I removed the variable of visible rank and observed how people treated someone they perceived as service staff. She clicked to the next slide, showing data. The results were disturbing. Of 50 officers I directly interacted with, only 8 treated me with basic courtesy. Only 3 asked my name. Only 1 questioned whether I might be someone other than who they assumed. A commander in the front row raised his hand. Ma'am, with respect, isn't that just normal human behavior? People make quick assessments all the time. Chen nodded. You're right, Commander. It is normal. That's what makes it dangerous. We've normalized making assumptions based on appearance. We've accepted that it's okay to treat people differently based on whether they look important to us. She advanced to the next slide. But in military operations, that normalization kills people. The enemy who doesn't look like an enemy. The asset disguised as something harmless. The threat hiding in plain sight. Our assumptions become tactical vulnerabilities. She walked away from the podium. Let me tell you what happened after that night at the Officers' Club. I took command of Destroyer Squadron 15. I implemented a culture based on universal respect and assumption-free assessment. And within 6 months, we became the highest performing squadron in the Atlantic Fleet. The data is compelling, she continued, returning to the podium. Our retention rates increased 40%. Our readiness scores topped the fleet. Our sailors reported the highest job satisfaction of any unit. And we did it by doing one simple thing differently. She looked at the audience. We stopped judging people by their appearance and started seeing them as they actually were. Another officer raised his hand. Captain Chen, how do you scale that? You can personally model behavior in a squadron of 1,200 people. But how does a fleet commander do it with 40,000 sailors? Excellent question. The answer is, you don't scale it through policy or regulation. You scale it through teaching other leaders to model the same behavior. She pulled up her next slide showing an organizational chart. When I left Destroyer Squadron 15, my executive officer fleeted up to command. He maintained the culture because he had learned the principles. His junior officers, who learned from both of us, took those lessons to their next assignments. Sailors who served under us requested transfers to be with commanders who treated them with respect. She advanced the slide. The culture spread not through top-down mandate, but through demonstration and desire. People want to work in organizations where they're valued. When they experience that, they seek it out and recreate it wherever they go. For the next hour, Chen walked through case studies, data analysis, and practical applications of respect-based leadership. She showed how questioning assumptions improved tactical decision-making, how treating junior personnel with respect increased retention of the best sailors, how vulnerability and honesty from senior leaders created stronger organizations. At the end, she opened for questions. A captain near the back stood. "Ma'am, I have to ask. The story about serving champagne has become legendary. But some officers say it was a setup, that you deliberately created a situation to embarrass people. How do you respond to that criticism?" Chen smiled slightly. "I'd say those officers are correct. I did deliberately create a situation. But the purpose wasn't to embarrass anyone. It was to reveal truth." She walked to the edge of the stage. "In my experience, the biggest problem in military leadership isn't bad people. It's good people operating on autopilot, making unconscious assumptions, treating some people as more valuable than others without even realizing they're doing it." She looked directly at the captain, who had asked the question. "You can't fix a problem people don't know exists." "So yes, I created a situation that revealed the problem. I made it visible. I forced people to confront their own biases and assumptions. That's not entrapment. That's leadership." Another officer asked, "What happened to the club manager who asked you to serve drinks?" Richard Foster completed 90 days of intensive training on professional interaction and respect protocols. He's still the club manager at Norfolk, and by all accounts, he's excellent at his job. More importantly, he's become an advocate for treating everyone with dignity regardless of their role. She smiled. The goal was never to destroy him. The goal was to develop him. That principle applies to everyone in leadership. We develop rather than destroy people who make mistakes, as long as they're willing to learn. A commander raised her hand. "Ma'am, I'm a female officer who's experienced similar situations to what you described. Being mistaken for admin staff, having my authority questioned, being underestimated. How do you recommend we handle those situations?" Chen's expression showed understanding. "I could tell you to immediately correct people, to assert your authority, to make them understand who you are. But honestly, I've found another approach more effective." She walked toward the officer who had asked. "Let them underestimate you. Observe how they behave when they think you're not important. Learn from it. Then, when you do reveal who you are, use it as a teaching moment rather than a gotcha moment." She paused. "The goal isn't to punish people for bias. The goal is to eliminate the bias by showing them its consequences. Every time someone underestimates you and then discovers their mistake, you've created an opportunity for them to examine their assumptions." After the lecture concluded, several officers approached Chen to continue the conversation. One of them was Commander David Kim, who had served as a lieutenant in Destroyer Squadron 15 during Chen's command. "Captain Chen," he said, "I wanted to thank you. Serving under your command changed my entire approach to leadership." Commander Kim: "Good to see you. Where are you now?" "I just took command of USS Gridley. I'm using everything you taught us about respect-based leadership. It's making a real difference. That's exactly what I hoped would happen. The lessons spreading through people who experience them." Kim pulled out his phone. "I wanted to show you something. Last month, I did my own version of your champagne experiment. I went aboard in civilian clothes before assuming command and observed how my crew interacted with someone they thought was a civilian contractor. What did you learn? That I inherited some of the same cultural problems you faced. People making assumptions, treating civilians as less important than uniformed personnel, bias based on appearance. And what did you do? Used it as a teaching moment at my change of command speech. Just like you did." The crew was shocked at first, but now we're having real conversations about respect and assumptions. Chen smiled with genuine pride. That's perfect. You took the lesson and adapted it to your situation. That's exactly how culture changes. Not through rigid policy, but through leaders modeling behavior and teaching principles. Over the next 2 years, Captain Chen's influence continued to spread through the Navy. Officers who had served under her command took her lessons to new units. The training program she developed, based on her methods, was implemented across the surface fleet. The story of the Champagne incident became a standard case study in leadership courses. But more importantly, the principles behind the story began to change how officers thought about their responsibilities. Questioning assumptions became standard practice. Treating every person with respect regardless of rank became an expectation rather than an aspiration. Leaders at all levels began to recognize that their behavior mattered most when they thought nobody important was watching. 3 years after the Officers' Club incident, Chen was promoted to Rear Admiral, lower half, one of the youngest officers to achieve flag rank. She was given responsibility for surface warfare training and development across the entire Navy. Her first action was to mandate respect-based leadership training for all new officers and senior enlisted leaders. Her second action was to implement cultural surveys across the fleet, similar to what she had pioneered in her squadron. Her third action was to create a program where senior officers would periodically observe units while in plain clothes or without obvious rank insignia, specifically to assess how people behaved when they didn't know they were being evaluated by leadership. Some traditional officers complained that this was trickery or entrapment. Chen's response was published in a widely circulated memo. The measure of an organization's culture is not how people behave when they know they're being watched by senior leadership. It's how they behave when they think nobody important is paying attention. If that makes you uncomfortable, ask yourself why. 5 years after serving Champagne at the Officers' Club, Admiral Chen, now a 2-star Rear Admiral, was invited back to Naval Station Norfolk for a special ceremony. The Officers' Club had been renovated and was being rededicated with a new name, the Admiral Chen Leadership Center. Chen stood in the same room where she had served drinks years earlier, now surrounded by hundreds of officers and sailors who had been influenced by her leadership philosophy. The base commander, now a different officer than Captain Rodriguez, gave the dedication speech. This building represents more than just a place for social gatherings. It represents a fundamental shift in how we think about leadership, respect, and organizational culture. He gestured to Chen. 5 years ago, Admiral Chen walked into this room and taught us a lesson we desperately needed to learn. That respect should be universal, that assumptions are dangerous, that the measure of our character is how we treat people when we think there's no consequence. He unveiled a plaque that would be permanently mounted in the entrance. True leadership is measured not by how we treat those above us, but by how we treat those we believe are below us. Never assume, always respect. Everyone matters. Inspired by Radm Sarah Chen, USN. Chen approached the podium to speak, and the room fell silent. When I walked into this room 5 years ago, she began, I was testing a hypothesis. I believed that our Navy had a cultural problem that we weren't addressing. That we had normalized treating people differently based on appearance and perceived rank. That we had lost sight of the principle that every person deserves respect. She looked around the room. What I learned that night confirmed my hypothesis. But it also gave me hope. Because the officers who made mistakes that night didn't make them out of malice. They made them out of habit. Unconscious bias, patterns of behavior that had never been challenged. She smiled. And when those patterns were challenged, when they were made visible and questioned, most people wanted to change. They wanted to be better. They just needed someone to show them how. She walked away from the podium. Today, this building is being renamed as a leadership center, but I want to be clear about what that means. Leadership isn't about rank or position or authority. Leadership is about how you treat the people around you every single day, in every interaction, regardless of whether anyone important is watching. She stopped in the exact spot where she had stood holding a serving tray 5 years earlier. If you take one lesson from this room, from that night, from everything that followed, let it be this. The person you're about to dismiss or ignore or treat as invisible might be the most important person you meet today. Not because of their rank, but because of their humanity, their knowledge, their potential contribution. She looked directly at the audience. See people, all people, really see them. Question your assumptions. Treat everyone with the respect they deserve as fellow human beings serving this nation. That's not just good leadership. That's basic decency. After the ceremony, Chen was approached by Richard Foster, the club manager who had asked her to serve drinks 5 years earlier. "Admiral Chen," Foster said, "I wanted to thank you again. What you did for me, giving me the chance to learn rather than just firing me, it changed my life." Chen shook his hand. "You did the work, Mr. Foster. I just gave you the opportunity." I've been thinking about that night a lot lately, about how close I came to losing everything because I made a snap judgment. We all make snap judgments. The question is whether we're willing to recognize them and change our behavior. Foster pulled out a small notebook. "I've been keeping this since that night. Every day, I write down moments when I catch myself making an assumption about someone based on their appearance. Then I write what I learned when I question that assumption." He showed her the notebook, filled with entries. "In 5 years, I've documented over 1,000 instances where my first impression was wrong, where someone I might have dismissed turned out to be remarkable." Chen looked through the notebook with interest. "This is incredible, Mr. Foster. Have you thought about sharing this? It could be a powerful teaching tool. Actually, I've been using it in the training sessions I run now. The Admiral Chen Cultural Awareness Program that we teach to all new personnel." Chen raised an eyebrow. "The what program?" Foster looked slightly embarrassed. "That's what everyone calls it. The training you mandated about questioning assumptions and universal respect. Nobody uses the official name. They just call it the Admiral Chen Program." Chen smiled. "I suppose there are worse legacies to have." Across the room, Lieutenant Bradley Morrison, the officer who had complained about waiting 20 minutes for a drink that night, approached. He was now a lieutenant commander and had requested to attend the ceremony specifically to speak with Chen. "Admiral Chen," Morrison said, "I don't know if you remember me." "I remember everyone from that night, Lieutenant Commander. You were one of the officers who took champagne from my tray and complained about the service." Morrison winced. "Yes, ma'am, that was me. And I wanted to tell you that moment changed my career. I wrote an essay about it for my promotion board that apparently made an impression. But more importantly, it changed how I lead. Tell me about your current command. I'm the executive officer on USS Winston. We just won the Battle Efficiency Award. And I credit a lot of that success to implementing the leadership principles I learned from you, both directly and through your example." Chen looked pleased. "That's the real legacy. Not the awards or the recognition, but the ripple effect of changed behavior spreading through leaders who take the lessons to their next commands." Morrison pulled out his phone. "Ma'am, can I show you something?" He pulled up a video that had recently gone viral within the Navy. It showed a rear admiral at another base, visiting a ship while wearing a working uniform with no rank visible. The crew, not recognizing him, treated him dismissively until the commanding officer arrived and rendered honors. The admiral had then given a speech eerily similar to Chen's original change of command address, talking about assumptions, respect, and cultural problems. "Your approach is spreading," Morrison said. "Senior officers across the Navy are doing variations of what you did, testing their commands, using moments of being underestimated as teaching opportunities." Chen watched the video with mixed feelings. "I hope they're doing it for the right reasons. Not to catch people making mistakes, but to genuinely assess and improve organizational culture. From what I've seen, most are. You started something important, ma'am. A real conversation about how we treat each other and what that says about our values." As the reception wound down and people began to leave, Chen stood alone in the newly renamed Leadership Center, looking at the plaque with her words inscribed. A young ensign approached hesitantly. "Admiral Chen, may I ask you something?" "Of course." The ensign gestured around the room. All of this, the changed culture, the training programs, the renewed focus on respect and equality. It all started because you served champagne one night. Did you know it would lead to all this? Chen thought about the question. No. When I walked into this room 5 years ago, I had no idea what would happen. I just knew that something needed to change, that we couldn't keep operating with unconscious bias and casual disrespect and expect to retain our best people. So you took a risk. I did. But it was a calculated risk. I believed that most people, when confronted with their own biases and given tools to address them, would choose to be better. And you were right. Mostly. Not everyone changed. Some people left the Navy rather than adapt to a culture that demanded universal respect. But the people who stayed, who embraced the change, they've built something better than what we had before. The ensign smiled. I'm one of the people who joined because of what you built. I heard about the culture in the surface Navy now, about how it's different from other services, how respect and development matter more than rank and ego. That's why I chose this path. Chen felt a surge of pride and satisfaction. Then it was worth it. Every uncomfortable moment, every difficult conversation, every time I had to confront bias and assumption. If it created a Navy where talented people like you want to serve, it was worth all of it. The ensign saluted and walked away, leaving Chen alone with her thoughts. She thought about that night 5 years ago. Walking into this room in a plain uniform, being mistaken for service staff, serving champagne to officers who didn't see her. At the time, it had been a test, an experiment, a way to assess culture and identify problems. But it had become something much larger, a movement, a philosophy, a fundamental shift in how the Navy thought about leadership and respect. And all of it started with one simple choice: to let herself be invisible and observe how people behaved when they thought nobody important was watching. That choice had revealed uncomfortable truths, but it had also revealed hope. Hope that people could change, that organizations could transform, that culture could be built on respect rather than rank. As Chen left the officers' club that evening, walking past the plaque with her name and words, she thought about legacy. She had commanded ships and squadrons, had made tactical decisions that affected thousands of sailors, had risen to flag rank and shaped policy across the entire Navy. But her real legacy wasn't in the operations, or the promotions, or the ribbons on her chest. It was in moments like this. A young ensign joining the Navy because of the culture that had been built. A former club manager keeping a journal of challenged assumptions. Junior officers learning to question their biases and treat everyone with respect. That was the legacy that mattered, not the woman who served champagne, but the thousands of people who learned from that night that respect should be universal, that assumptions are dangerous, and that true leadership is measured by how you treat people when you think nobody important is watching. That lesson would outlive her career, her rank, and even her memory. And that made everything worthwhile.